In a concrete prison cell hidden in the heart of Abuja, a man whispers into the void, "Freedom is not a request, it's a birthright." His name is Nnamdi Kanu, silenced unseen, and buried by a regime determined to erase his voice. While the Nigerian government parades across world stages, branding him a criminal in the shadows of confinement, Kanu becomes something else, entirely a symbol. At the same moment, thousands of kilometers away, on the dusty plains of Burkina Faso, a young president named Ibrahim Traore receives an envelope. No name, no address. Just a symbol, a rising sun behind broken chains. Inside is a letter written on scraps of legal paper and smuggled through countless hands from the depths of Kuj prison to the seat of power in Ouagadougou. This isn't just any letter. It does not plead for mercy. It roars with purpose. Africa must stop whispering, it says. We must speak or we will be spoken for. And then something no one expected. Traoré reads the forbidden words out loud, not in secrecy, but before the entire African Union. In a room full of suits and silence, a fire ignites. Some leaders shift in their seats, others walk out, but the seed is planted. A whisper has become a roar. This is not just the story of a prisoner. This is the story of what happens when truth refuses to stay buried, of how a single voice, locked away and forgotten, can shatter walls, not with guns but with words. It's a story of youth rising of regimes, trembling of a continent standing at the edge of awakening. So ask yourself what happens when the voice they tried to silence finds a louder echo. If you believe in a free and united Africa, share this story. Let the voice they feared the most be the one we all remember. Behind the fortified walls of Kuj prison in Abuja, there were no reporters, no trials, and no headlines. Just silence. A fluorescent hum replaced the gavel of justice. The man locked inside Nnamdi Kanu was neither charged nor tried. He was simply erased. No phone calls, no visitors without state permission. Even food arrived cold, and medical care came too late, if it came at all. To the Nigerian government, Kanu was a separatist, a danger to national unity. To others, he was a voice, a defiant one. But to the regime, that voice had to be caged. President Tinubu, inheriting the crackdown from his predecessor, vowed to finish the job. Silence him completely, the orders echoed. But even silence can be defied. Stripped of ink, stripped of paper, Kanu found ways to write. He scribbled on scraps of toilet tissue on the backs of legal forms, and when desperation demanded, even on his own skin. These weren't letters begging for freedom. They were declarations. His words weren't for himself. They were for a people, for a continent. I do not seek release. One fragment read, I seek liberation. Not just for Biafra, but for all of Africa. What the state underestimated was not the power of his words, but the desperation of those who heard them. A young prison guard, moved by Kanu's resolve, smuggled the first message out, hidden in the sole of his boot. He was never caught, because like all truths carried in whispers, it found the cracks in the wall. And then there was another message, and another. Until Kanu's words became more than ink, they became a movement. Meanwhile, outside the prison, the world looked away. Nigeria's allies focused on trade deals, regional stability, and oil. The mainstream media ignored the man in the cell, but Kanu noticed everything. And he kept writing. His cell became less of a tomb and more of a command post. One where strategy wasn't drawn in blood, but in vision. He didn't call for war, he called for awakening. And in doing so, he transformed from prisoner to prophet, still shackled yet already moving. Because when you bury a voice born from truth, you don't silence it, you teach it how to echo. What began as a whisper in a prison cell soon became a wind sweeping across borders. The first letter, folded tightly and hidden beneath the sole of a sympathetic guard's boot, traveled silently through checkpoints, alleys, and trusted hands. From one believer to another, from activist to journalist to student, the words of Nnamdi Kanu moved without noise but with purpose. His message didn't ask for rescue. It didn't call for rebellion. It simply stated Africa must stop whispering. 10 more letters followed. Some were memorized and repeated in hushed conversations at universities. Others were encrypted and sent through digital channels, bouncing from Lagos to Accra, Nairobi to Berlin. Every line carried the same flame, a demand for dignity, for agency, for voice. And then the words reached someone unexpected. In a heavily guarded military compound in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, a sealed envelope appeared on the desk of a young President Ibrahim Traore. No sender, no official stamp, only a hand-drawn symbol, a rising sun behind broken chains. Traoré, soldier-turned-statesman, was no stranger to silence. He had risen not from palaces, but from the dust of the streets, carried by the hopes of youth and a promise of change. He opened the letter slowly. The paper was rough crease-stained. The handwriting was uneven, but the words burned. "This is not a plea," it read. "This is a mirror. If you look into it and see only danger, then you have chosen to forget where we came from." Traoré didn't speak, not yet. He read the letter again, then again, and again. The air around him shifted. He understood immediately this wasn't just a message, it was a match. A spark thrown into the dry grass of a continent, still grappling with the legacies of colonizers and the obedience of old regimes. If he chose to act, it wouldn't just be a diplomatic risk, it would be a generational declaration. The letter had escaped, and now it had arrived in the hands of a man not afraid to listen. President Ibrahim Traore sat alone in a quiet room. The letter from Nnamdi Kanu, now worn from being read so many times, rested on the table before him. The words echoed louder than any speech he had ever heard, and he knew the time to remain silent had passed. The next day, Traoré summoned his closest ministers. No cameras, no speeches, just urgency. On the table he placed the letter. Some recognized the name. Others looked away. One older minister, cautious and firm, spoke first. "Mr. President, if we act on this, ECOWAS will accuse us of interference. Nigeria is powerful. They will retaliate." Another added, "Kanu is labeled a separatist. Supporting him could isolate us. We have our own battles to fight." Traoré stood still, his eyes sharp but calm. "I did not take this office to make friends with fear," he said. "If our neighbors silence truth and we stay quiet, then what are we?" The room fell silent. They all knew he had made his decision. This wasn't about diplomacy anymore. This was about conscience. Then came the African Union Summit, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Presidents in suits lined the grand hall. Military leaders polished their medals, and among them Ibrahim Traoré arrived with no speech, no notes, only the folded letter in hand. Nigeria's President Tinubu was already there. His presence loomed large, his expression unreadable. He called it a crisis of sovereignty and demanded that the African Union punish Burkina Faso for meddling. Then Traoré stepped forward. "I have no speech to give," he said, "only a voice to share." And with that he began to read. The room froze. Words once written in confinement now thundered through microphones. Lines like, "We are not slaves to borders drawn by colonizers, and let Africa hear itself for once." The letter didn't just expose Nigeria. It exposed the silence of all those who chose comfort over courage. Some leaders walked out, others clapped. A few wiped their eyes. Traoré hadn't just read a letter. He had detonated a truth bomb. And as the echoes rang across the continent, it was no longer a question of whether people would listen, it was whether they would act. The words of Nnamdi Kanu, once confined to the shadows of a prison cell, had become thunder rolling across a restless continent. In Lagos, students crowded around phones, replaying clips of President Traoré reading the letter aloud. In Accra, murals appeared overnight, Kanu's face beside painted words, still speaking. In Nairobi and Johannesburg, youth held sit-ins not with chants of violence, but with pages of the letter held in the air, like sacred scripture. On Twitter and TikTok, hashtags blazed across timelines. Voice of Africa. We are becoming. Cite, Africa must speak. The establishment didn't know how to respond. In Abuja, President Tinubu's inner circle descended into chaos. Shut it down, he barked. Discredit him. Call it fake. The Department of State Services, DSS, began tapping phones, scanning emails, surveilling protest organizers from Berlin to Toronto. But the more they tried to delete, the more voices rose. Every time a post vanished, 10 more appeared. Every time a message was censored, someone translated it into another language. The internet had become a battlefield, and the youth were winning. Then something no one expected happened. Peter Obi, respected, measured, and known for his careful words, stood before the press and said, "When a government fears a letter more than a gun, you must ask what truth are they hiding." It was the first time a major political figure openly questioned Tinubu's actions, and he wasn't alone. Grassroots senators who had long stayed silent began asking hard questions. Why is Nnamdi Kanu still in prison without trial? What are we so afraid of? From there, small protests turned into steady marches. University students in Enugu wore shirts with lines from Kanu's letter. Sit-ins blocked roads in Ibadan. In Abuja, even under military watch, some dared to whisper the letter aloud in public spaces. They weren't demanding chaos. They were demanding clarity. Not rebellion, but reckoning. One sign held high during a peaceful march read, "We are not afraid to listen." And that was the government's greatest fear. Not the man, not the message, but the millions finally ready to hear it. Desperation crept into the corridors of power. The protests were growing, the internet unmanageable, and the letter that cursed letter had become unstoppable. President Tinubu no longer wanted to silence Nnamdi Kanu with censorship. He wanted him gone. In a late-night meeting inside Aso Rock, Tinubu's closest advisors gathered behind closed doors. No records, no minutes. Just a single objective. If Traoré grants him asylum, one whispered Kanu becomes untouchable. Tinubu's eyes narrowed. Then he must never leave Cuj, he said. No trial, no noise. Just silence, permanent silence. The plan was swift and cold. A trained operative from the DSS Nigeria's secret intelligence unit would infiltrate the prison posing as a new security officer. His mission, make it look like an accident. No witnesses, no trace, no body. But outside the president's circle, others were watching too. International human rights groups had been tracking Kanu's case quietly for months. After repeated denials, they finally secured permission to visit him. What the Nigerian authorities didn't know was that an extraction had already been arranged, orchestrated with foreign diplomats and African watchdogs. Just hours before the assassin arrived, a plain medical van rolled through the gates of Cuj prison. No sirens, no press. Inside, beneath hospital blankets and oxygen tubes, was Kanu, frail but breathing. By the time the operative reached the cell, it was empty. He sent a coded message back to Aso Rock. "The bird has flown." Tinubu erupted in rage. The silence he had planned was dissolving. The voice he feared most was no longer imprisoned. Nnamdi Kanu wasn't just alive. He was moving toward Traoré, toward the youth, and toward a truth they could no longer contain. Under a blanket of stars in the Sahel night, a convoy of trucks marked with red crosses crept across the Nigeria-Niger border. Inside one of them, hidden among humanitarian aid and oxygen tanks, lay Nnamdi Kanu, weakened, silent, but alive. Thanks to quiet negotiations led by President Traoré's envoys and international rights groups, the impossible had happened. No speeches, no cameras, just action. The border guards briefed only moments before let the convoy through without question. By midnight, the trucks rolled into Burkina Faso's capital. Waiting under the open sky was President Ibrahim Traore himself, surrounded by a small group of soldier students and diplomats. When Kanu stepped out, his body frail from captivity, the crowd did not cheer. They simply watched in awe as history walked among them. "I was not rescued to rest," Kanu said. "I was rescued to rise." Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You are safe here, but you are not finished." Cameras that had been hidden until then flashed. The image, two men, one freed, one defiant, spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a signal Africa's voice was no longer chained. It was rising. In the center of Ouagadougou, beneath a sky heavy with dust and possibility, a stage rose, not for a concert, but for a reckoning. Cameras from across the continent turned toward the moment. On that stage stood President Ibrahim Traore, and beside him Nnamdi Kanu, once silenced, now standing. Kanu wore white, his hand lifted slowly. The crowd roared, not with frenzy but with purpose. From Bobo Dioulasso to Nairobi, from Dakar to Lagos, millions watched live. Churches rang bells, mosques whispered prayers. Youth painted murals and chanted not slogans of rebellion, but verses from a letter once scrawled on toilet paper. Traoré stepped to the microphone. "Africa will no longer imprison its future," he said. "This man was locked in a cell, but it was your courage, your voices, your refusal to look away that broke the chains." Every sentence struck like thunder. In Nairobi, students applauded in lecture halls. In Lagos, even under surveillance, some dared to smile. In Accra, hashtags surged again. "Still speaking. We are becoming." And in Abuja, behind the sealed doors of Aso Rock, President Tinubu sat in silence. The screen before him showed the celebration, two men on a stage, and a sea of people not waiting for permission. His jaw clenched, his grip weakened. Around him, nothing but the sound of a world he could no longer control. But this wasn't just a moment of triumph. It was a warning. In the shadows, old powers, both foreign and local, began to whisper. They were watching, planning. Not everyone was ready to let the fire burn. Yet for now, the voice they feared most had returned, not in anger but in truth. Nnamdi Kanu's final words from the stage echoed across Africa. "We are not waiting for freedom. We are becoming it. If this story moved you, share it. Let it reach another village, another city, another soul. Because freedom doesn't spread through speeches, it spreads through courage. And this voice once caged is now alive. The only question left is, will we listen?" And so here we stand, not at the end of a tale, but at the edge of a reckoning. Nnamdi Kanu may have walked out of that prison with chains no longer on his wrists, but the chains we carry as Africans are not always visible. They bind our minds, they silence our stories, they dilute our dreams. But today they have met their match, a truth so profound it echoed beyond bars, borders, and betrayals. This isn't just about one man. It never was. Kanu is not a hero carved from marble or myth. He is a man, flesh, flaw, and fire. A man whose refusal to be broken has reminded us all of something we were taught to forget, that freedom is not a gift bestowed by governments. It is a birthright declared by the soul. As an African, I do not watch this unfold with distant awe. I feel it in my bones. I carry the weight of ancestors whose names were wiped from ledgers and whose voices were reduced to whispers. I live in cities where corruption smiles in daylight and justice begs at midnight. I walk past monuments built with foreign loans while our schools crumble. I see leaders dressed in Western suits speaking of sovereignty, yet beholden to foreign banks and borrowed guns. But something has shifted. For years we were told to wait for better elections, wait for reforms, wait for development, wait for someone to save us. But Kanu did not wait. He wrote, he resisted, he remembered. And in doing so, he reminded us that we do not need to ask permission to be free. We only need the courage to claim it. Traoré too did not wait. He listened. In a continent where too many leaders speak only to foreign powers, he chose to hear his people. He chose to act not for applause but for legacy. And that legacy is not just in the rescue of one man, but in the revival of a movement. Africa has always had its prophets, from Nkrumah to Sankara, from Biko to Lumumba, and now perhaps Kanu joins them, not because he sought to be idolized, but because he dared to be honest. His letters were not literature, they were lifelines, written in confinement yet breathing with liberation. And we, the youth, the tired, the awake, we are the heirs to those words. We know now that freedom does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives in moments of defiance and whispers that refuse to die, in courage passed hand to hand like fire. It arrives when someone dares to say, "I will not be silent." So where do we go from here? We look inward and we organize. We look backward and we learn. We look forward and we march. Because the truth is, the system will fight back. It already is. Tinubu may have lost this round, but the machinery that built his regime is still humming. The foreign interests that feed on African silence are still watching. They will offer deals, distractions, divisions. They will fund disinformation, weaponize unity, criminalize dissent. But they are too late. Something has awakened in us, and it cannot be unawakened. I have seen it in the eyes of students who read Kanu's letter aloud in universities where truth was once banned. I have felt it in the songs of market women who hum resistance without knowing they do. I have heard it in the silence that follows a bold statement, not fear, but recognition. Africa is not rising. Africa has risen. Quietly, steadily, fiercely. We no longer need permission to be proud, to be political, to be free. And to those who still try to brand voices like Kanu's as dangerous, I ask, dangerous to whom? To the people, or to your power? Because what he exposed was not a threat, it was a mirror. And the reflection is uncomfortable for those who profit from forgetting. This continent has bled enough for boundaries drawn by strangers. It has bowed enough to flags that do not feed us. It has waited enough for saviors who only arrive with contracts and cuffs, no more. Let the fire that lit the sky in Ouagadougou spread. Let every young African who feels invisible know you are not alone. Your voice is valid, your pain is political, your dreams are not too big, your anger is not misplaced. Let every elder who once marched under burning sun and burning bullets know your fight was not in vain. We remember, and we continue. Let every leader who fears this awakening know it is not a wave to be crushed. It is a tide, and tides do not ask permission to rise. To Kanu, wherever you are now, thank you for reminding us. Not with perfection, but with persistence. Not with noise, but with clarity. To Traoré, thank you for choosing conscience over caution. May more follow. To Africa, thank you for still believing in yourself, even when they told you not to. And to those still asking, still doubting, still whispering, we are not waiting for freedom, we are becoming it. And this time, we will not be silenced. Not by fear, not by force, not by forgetfulness. Because the truth once spoken does not die. It only waits for the next voice to carry it. When we listened to the story of Nnamdi Kanu, we did not just hear about a prisoner, we heard ourselves. In his silence, we heard the muting of our histories. In his letters, we recognized the messages we were never taught to write. And in his escape, we felt our own chains loosen. This story broadcast across phones and whispers, told in classrooms and over firelight, is not one we simply watched. We lived it. And because of that, we are changed. One of the first lessons we, the audience, take is this. Silence is not neutrality. It is complicity. Too long, we have watched injustices unfold in the news, shaking our heads, maybe forwarding a post, maybe whispering our concerns. But what did that change? Kanu's letter taught us that one voice can ignite 10. 10 can spark 1,000, and 1,000, if brave enough, can shake the continent. We now understand that to be silent in the face of oppression is to offer your voice to the oppressor, and we refuse. The second lesson is the power of witness, to see and not turn away, to know and not deny. There was a time when many of us, even within Nigeria, didn't know Kanu was still alive. The state buried him behind walls, not just of concrete, but of distraction. But when the truth emerged, when the letter reached Traoré, and then us, we bore witness. We saw a man denied justice. We saw a government afraid of its own citizen, and by witnessing we gave him power. This is not just about Kanu. This is about the next child arrested for protesting, the next journalist silenced for asking questions, the next activist made to disappear. We have learned that to watch is to protect. The world watches now, and that means the walls must answer. Thirdly, we learned that liberation is not a Western export. It is not delivered in peacekeeping boxes or written into foreign aid contracts. It is not taught in European universities. It is homegrown. It rises in prison cells. It stirs in the bellies of market women. It is handwritten in local dialects and shouted in youth protests. Africa's freedom will not come in foreign tongues. It will come in our own. We saw that in Traoré. Young, unpolished, but real. He didn't need approval from the West. He didn't need a donor to validate his courage. He read a letter and recognized truth. That is leadership. The fourth lesson is that unity is no longer optional. The letter was not addressed to Burkina Faso. It wasn't sent to Traoré alone. It was meant for all of us, for Kenya, for Ghana, for Mali, for South Africa. The colonial map that divided us was never meant to empower us. And now we must tear it apart not in war, but in will. When we act together, no regime can erase us. When we speak as one, no force can mute us. The youth of this continent have learned that hashtags are not frivolous. They are tools, movements, memories. The mouse still speaking tag wasn't just about a man. It was about a mindset, that we are not done, that we have more to say. Fifth, and perhaps most powerfully, we learned the difference between fear and reverence. Many of us were taught to fear power, to bow to it, to accept its violence as natural. But what if we reimagine power? What if power is not a threat, but a responsibility? What if a president, instead of being worshipped, is held accountable? Kanu's story reminded us that fear is a cage, and reverence without question is its lock. We no longer fear leaders, we challenge them. And to those watching from outside Africa, we have a message: do not pity us. Do not tokenize our suffering. If you truly care, amplify our voices, not your version of our story. Share our truth, not your interpretation of it. Support our freedom, not your interests. Because what we have learned is that no one will save us but ourselves. To the African diaspora, scattered by force or fortune, this is your story too. Your ancestors' chains echoed in Kanu's cell. Your heritage vibrated in Traoré's speech. Come home not just in body but in purpose. Help build what was denied to you. And finally, the lesson of hope. Not the soft, passive hope of someday, but the loud, living hope that acts, that organizes, that remembers. Kanu did not write because he knew he would be saved. He wrote because he knew someone would listen, that someone is us. We are listening, and we are moving. So what do we do now, having learned all this? We keep the fire alive. We teach our children this history. We vote with conscience. We protest with purpose. We build communities, not just campaigns. We hold our governments to their promises. And when they betray us, we do not retreat. We remind them we are still here. We carry the letter, not on paper, but in spirit, in every act of truth, in every refusal to be erased. This is not the end of the story. This is the moment the audience stands and becomes the actors. We are not waiting for change. We are becoming it. Now that we have listened, now that we have learned what comes next. The third truth we must carry forward is that freedom is not an event. It is a practice. It is not something we achieve once and forget. It is something we must rehearse every day in our speech, our actions, our communities, our institutions. The voice that once echoed from a prison cell cannot be allowed to fade into silence again. It must evolve into many voices across all sectors, across all generations. From the slums of Kibera to the classrooms in Dakar, From the mines of Congo to the coastlines of Mozambique, we must now ask ourselves, how do we build systems that cannot be shaken by the jailing of one voice? How do we ensure the next Nnamdi Kanu is not silenced, but surrounded by structures that protect truth and demand justice? Because the story we just witnessed this moment in our history is not just a legend to be remembered. It is a challenge to be continued. We must build media platforms that do not serve power, but serve the people. We must elevate journalists who do not seek clicks, but clarity. We must protect whistleblowers, fund educators, and resist the censorship that creeps in dressed as stability. Kanu showed us that even a man with no pen can still write history. But imagine if he had support. Imagine if he had legal aid that wasn't intimidated doctors who weren't denied access, a state that didn't fear dissent but engaged with it. We must stop building nations that are afraid of their own people. We must learn to disagree with dignity, to debate without dehumanizing. For the lesson is also this: if we wait until injustice arrives at our own door, it will be too late. Justice, like freedom, must be shared, or it is never real. And so we ask, where are our Pan-African unions that protect citizens, not just presidents? Where are the alliances of civil society that reach across borders with more strength than foreign corporations do? Why is it easier to move oil across Africa than to move solidarity? Traoré stood with Kanu. Who will we stand with next? We must be bolder, not just in protest but in proposal. Let us dream of new schools, new courts, new parliaments, built not in imitation of colonial models, but in celebration of our context. Let us fund our own media. Let us write our own curriculums. Let us govern with our own values, not borrowed ones that have never served us. The West does not know how to save us, and it should not have to. It is not their burden, it is ours. It is our privilege to rise, to rethink, to reimagine, to remember. This story began in silence. It ends in symphony, but only if we each become a note. Let the builders rise. Let the teachers teach truth. Let the artists paint resistance. Let the farmers plant with pride. Let the students question. Let the mothers lead. Let the fathers protect. Let the children dare. Let Africa not be a headline, but a heartbeat. Because the next chapter is not waiting to be written. It is waiting to be lived. And so we go forward not asking if we will be heard, but knowing we already are, still speaking, still rising, still becoming. Not your interpretation of it. Support our freedom, not your interests. Because what we have learned is that no one will save us but ourselves. To the African diaspora, scattered by force or fortune, this is your story too. Your ancestors' chains echoed in Kanu's cell. Your heritage vibrated in Traoré's speech. Come home not just in body but in purpose. Help build what was denied to you. And finally, the lesson of hope. Not the soft, passive hope of someday, but the loud, living hope that acts, that organizes, that remembers. Kanu did not write because he knew he would be saved. He wrote because he knew someone would listen, that someone is us. We are listening, and we are moving. So what do we do now, having learned all this? We keep the fire alive. We teach our children this history. We vote with conscience. We protest with purpose. We build communities, not just campaigns. We hold our governments to their promises. And when they betray us, we do not retreat. We remind them we are still here. We carry the letter, not on paper, but in spirit, in every act of truth, in every refusal to be erased. This is not the end of the story. This is the moment the audience stands and becomes the actors. We are not waiting for change. We are becoming it. Now that we have listened, now that we have learned what comes next. The third truth we must carry forward is that freedom is not an event. It is a practice. It is not something we achieve once and forget. It is something we must rehearse every day in our speech, our actions, our communities, our institutions. The voice that once echoed from a prison cell cannot be allowed to fade into silence again. It must evolve into many voices across all sectors, across all generations. From the slums of Kibera to the classrooms in Dakar, from the mines of Congo to the coastlines of Mozambique, we must now ask ourselves, how do we build systems that cannot be shaken by the jailing of one voice? How do we ensure the next Nnamdi Kanu is not silenced, but surrounded by structures that protect truth and demand justice? Because the story we just witnessed this moment in our history is not just a legend to be remembered. It is a challenge to be continued. We must build media platforms that do not serve power, but serve the people. We must elevate journalists who do not seek clicks, but clarity. We must protect whistleblowers, fund educators, and resist the censorship that creeps in dressed as stability. Kanu showed us that even a man with no pen can still write history. But imagine if he had support. Imagine if he had legal aid that wasn't intimidated doctors who weren't denied access, a state that didn't fear dissent but engaged with it. We must stop building nations that are afraid of their own people. We must learn to disagree with dignity, to debate without dehumanizing. For the lesson is also this: if we wait until injustice arrives at our own door, it will be too late. Justice, like freedom, must be shared, or it is never real. And so we ask, where are our Pan-African unions that protect citizens, not just presidents? Where are the alliances of civil society that reach across borders with more strength than foreign corporations do? Why is it easier to move oil across Africa than to move solidarity? Traoré stood with Kanu. Who will we stand with next? We must be bolder, not just in protest but in proposal. Let us dream of new schools, new courts, new parliaments, built not in imitation of colonial models, but in celebration of our context. Let us fund our own media. Let us write our own curriculums. Let us govern with our own values, not borrowed ones that have never served us. The West does not know how to save us.